competition keeps prices down far more effectively.
As long as suffering of sentient beings remain, I will remain in order to serve.
I imagined God like my grandfather.
In Conversations tonight, my guest is one of India's best-known architects, Dr. Balkrishna Doshi, who has spent a lifetime manifesting a commitment to housing for the poor. I'm delighted to welcome this year's winner of the prestigious Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Dr. Doshi, you have recently won the Aga Khan Award for your scheme in Indore for housing for the poor.
Yes.
Tell us about this award first.
The award has its own peculiarities as compared to the other awards. It is instituted by His Highness the Aga Khan, and this award has $500,000 to be awarded. But more than that, the procedure through which they select the entries and the diversification that they have is very important. I was one of the members of the master jury 3 years ago, and therefore I know in actual fact what happens. Even my other buildings were nominated earlier, so I knew the procedure then. But what I found was over the last 6 cycles, they have gradually added on from merely conservation, research, historical monuments, architecture for only Islamic cultures, that means architecture with a capital A. Now they have gone into the other areas where the effect on human beings is considered to be very important. So this particular award to me was very important in terms of it becomes almost like a landmark decision on housing in which social strives, social tensions are reduced, people's lives get improved, and also the quality of life is not just seen in buildings, but in the economic, social, cultural revitalization. But his other awards are for great historical buildings, very good buildings, mostly from the Arab world. Then there are also awards for research, conservation. But I feel that this award, this recognition, makes housing as an important issue. Normally in architectural schools or in profession, we never discuss about an award, or we don't even discuss about saying housing. We can talk about a great house or a private house or a palace or an institution, but we would never discuss about saying, well, can you do housing for the people who have nothing? Rehabilitation, what you call site and service project, because site and service doesn't have really architecture to talk about. It doesn't talk about the space or form only. So therefore one is talking about the basic issues of what really life is about. How do you really improve the quality of life, quality of environment in terms of health, hygiene, education, culture. And I think when the architecture emerges over 10, 20 years, one doesn't know what is going to happen.
Does the jury come down and actually look at the project, or are they able to evolve it, sort of assess it from
No,
drawings?
this is like there were something like close to 400 nominees were there. People either nominate or it has to be nominated by somebody. Then they are screened. The jury meets about 4 times in Geneva. For every time 5 days. Even His Highness is present there. His mandate is that I am not concerned with whom you give and what you give. The jury screens that. There is a written report, there are slides, photographs and the architect's version. Then they narrow down to maybe 70, 80, 100. Then they come down to about 40. Then there is a observation done by another architect or another sociologist who will be then doing this work. He comes to site, he will meet the client, he will meet the, that is user, he will meet the contractors, he would meet the public. In this case, they interviewed people. They interviewed Indo-Development Authority engineers. They interviewed our engineers, architects, that is me and my colleagues. And they talked extensively with the people who lived there. Then photographs are taken, document is made, then an impartial observation is made by somebody else. Then that goes back to the final jury, and then the award is given. Then it is distributed over about 10 or 12 people, depending upon that, you know. So half the $1 million are divided, and the division goes to not only the architect, it goes to the sponsor, that is here Indo-Development Authority. Second is the community itself, and then the architects and his colleagues. So that way I think this award is different from the Pritzker Prizes or the even other prizes. Even here JK awards and other awards is quite different. And I think what's important is it is not just given by looking at pictures. It's a true story on which it goes on merit, and also the observations of the jury. I think most important is the jury's gradual opening up this award to an award where architecture is not anymore capital A. It is an architecture which is connected to now a larger definition. For example, all historical books, I mean all history books don't talk of low cost housing, because what can you show there, what is tangible? So in this case, even the award which was also given to one of the Pakistani projects, there is no building. It is the migrants who come there and they have been rehabilitated, and that procedure who got the award.
Tell us that this is a project that's in Indore. What were the kind of processes and stages that you went through to be able to evolve something that was obviously so comprehensive and in tune with the needs of the people that you were building for?
I was invited by the commissioner there, and he asked me to come there to select a site for any building I liked, and I selected this plot of 200 acres. And so when we selected this 200 acres of plot, he asked me, why have you selected this plot which is given to housing, which is being already designed by the Madhya Pradesh Housing Board? I accepted that fact because I said I would like to do this because I am involved with housing for last 20 years, and I would like to experiment and show that even as architecture we can do something. So this was the first stage. When such housing is given as a project to housing boards or to the city, they cannot be done by themselves. So the World Bank comes in, then Housing and Urban Development Authority, HUDCO would come into this corporation. They would fund it, state government would fund it. So it's actually a project which is subsidized or paid for by many agencies, national and international. The World Bank has their own standards of housing. They would have their own norms, they have their own parameters. So they would say, you have to have so much open area, so much area for social services, so much cost for land, development of infrastructure, etc. So within those parameters, we have to do the projects. They are already done a plan. So the first time I got the plan, and I changed the plan, because normally in our housing, we always provide in normal standard plans, a big large public area as open space, and then the houses are put on streets. If you notice, most of the time that big open space becomes not used but a garbage dump.
Right.
Because neither there are trees nor there is anything else, and people even come there and abuse it. So one of the first criteria which we had found in our studies at the Vastushil Foundation was that the kind of use we do of open spaces is very different. Our open spaces in India are used more linearly, right across the houses or close by, because then they are used for weddings, marriages, graduate, for example, social gatherings, even meetings, or children playing cricket. Now that kind of a thing was not there. So the first thing I found was, we must change this whole area to what is required by the user as an everyday thing and avoid its abuse.
Do you interact with the user in some ways?
Yes, quite a lot. In fact, all our housing in the last 25 years, we have always done post-occupancy studies. Even in city planning, we have done these studies extensively, because we find that in anywhere for that matter, to make something worthwhile an architect must interact primarily with the user, with his lifestyle, and then go to the next stage of likely changes that may take place in 20-25 years.
And what is the balance here between sort of cultivating a sense of aesthetic and what looks pleasant and utilities? Is that ever in conflict for you?
No, not me, because I have found out that if you look at any traditional town, we always go to visit old towns. Actually, what is there, that we like? We like it because it looks like not only it lived in, but it is not monotonous. It has a lot of variety. Therefore, each individual family has something common and something uncommon. So there is a unity and diversity at the same time. Second one, we find that the use of their spaces, whether it's outdoor or indoor, whether it is a street, the veranda or a courtyard or a balcony, is related to how the life is lived together. So interaction like this becomes very important. Then the resources which we use, if you look at the housing in Jaisalmer, the generic form is the same with a courtyard. But a rich person has more decorated house, a bigger house than a smaller house, a very small house. But otherwise the generic form is the same. Now these are the things which I think an architect must look at. So aesthetic really gets born out of these conditions which are connected to climate, to lifestyle, to daily use and generations which use it.
I think one of the areas that most people in middle income and low income housing produced by the state or initiated by the state are despairing is the sheer quality of construction. How are you able to sort of influence the quality of construction and see that people get reasonable value for money?
This was one of the very unusual lessons that I found, is that if you get the staff involved, for example, this is executed by the Indore Development Authority.
So it's a sort of government.
That's right. It was
managed.
scrutinized by the World Bank. It was scrutinized by HUDCO, which means you have to convince them by stages that what you are doing is going to save them money, resources, and give something else to people. When we started doing this, we had a meeting with the officials of the Development Authority. We had even made a lecture. We made series of lectures. Mr. Das, who was the chief executive there, I suggested to him to have a citizens meeting. Usually even I have meetings with the people who are going to be occupants. Then with those meetings you tell them what you are doing and you are not going to impose on them something which is predominantly aesthetics and less of function, qualitative function, social and psychological and otherwise. Then after these meetings were done, what was most fascinating was the officials were more involved than we were involved. So every time we went there, they said, "Sir, we have saved this money here in drainage. Can we not plant trees?" This is the first housing in which, with the same money, total package, we have given them footpaths, streets, street lights, some of the social health institutions, garden, open space. Now this is something which is normally not given. For example, anytime we design low-cost housing, we consider that we must give them a shelter. First of all, the whole idea of nomenclature is wrong. When we say shelter, that means we are talking about charity as against home. So what we said is we will give you a home and we will give you an environment of the community. So this is a community project, not a charity to house people. I think these are the subtle but very major differences, that if we talk about community as such, then if we talk about giving people a home, children an identity, children an education and health, then it will change.
Are you also exploring sort of new technologies that help keep the costs down or increase the lifespan of structures?
We are doing, not in Indore we use was normal technology, but what we did was in these 60 houses that we did as demonstration, we tried to find from the existing housing that people have done in Tamil Nadu, in Gujarat, in Madhya Pradesh. We found out the standard norm that they had done. Now what it means is that bylaws give you certain criteria, but people are more ingenious than the bylaws. They know how to use or maximize the use of space. So we measured those things and we found that they knew how to do better staircases than us, better space planning, better volume planning and better production planning. which means you can make jalis, you can make staircases, you can make parapets and whatnot, which means one can use this ferro cement and other technologies. Now, when you use these components, it means employment, it means development of a cooperative institution. So, in technology, I would say it is not only the technology that one is talking about in terms of something new, but first technology is, can the people become themselves skillful and can they learn and earn money for their life? So, this is to me very important. The next one is, can they use the resources that they have and convert them or transfer them into something which they have not done before, which means more efficient use of material. Third one is new technology which has used somewhere else but not used. The fourth one is totally new technology which has not been used, like you use rice husk and bamboo and whatnot for concrete and cement and whatnot. Now, that was not done here. We have done it other places. We have done housing for Adivasis, like Narmada. We did for these ousties some houses in ferro cement, because ferro cement can be done by them.
What is ferro cement?
Ferro cement is chicken wire mesh put together like a chapati, you put cement. Now, you can mold it in any shape, you can repair it, and it can be built by anybody. Now, the advantage then is that you remove the thatch, you make the house more permanent. It may be thin, but at least it will not leak. It can be repaired. And then it is done by the Adivasis themselves. Now, this is what I think, one is trying to do, is use their skills for which they are good and try to find technology which can be maintained, repaired and upgraded by them. I think then it is the correct technology. Imported technologies become alien, like what Schumacher would talk about. Totally different world, cannot be compatible.
What are some of the qualities or sort of aspects of your own training and background and development that you feel have equipped you into being an effective and successful architect?
First was that I lived in villages. Then my family is a traditionally born family, so religious background, maybe cultural background, value systems. Then my education or training with Corbusier. And then my association with Louis Kahn and my frequent travels abroad to teach and hear. So, all I think has helped me, and in teaching, students have been asking me questions about the relevance more than anybody else. So, students have been my greatest teachers. And then you go and make a house and go and do post-occupancy study, and they will find faults in what you have done. So, actually it's a process which is, when you get involved totally, I think everybody teaches you something.
Well, in some ways, architecture is both sort of its art, its engineering, its sort of social conscience, its social awareness. What do you think have been the elements that have acted on your life, sort of the more personal aspects that may have sensitized you to these, apart from the external aspects of contact with your students and training? Do you have to be a particular kind of human being to be
I may go
architect?
a little far, esoteric way. I had met Dr. Stella Crambrish years ago in Philadelphia, who was teaching here and who wrote famous books in India. Once we were discussing about the temples and these columns, which we have, an Indian temple. So she talked about something which has struck me. She said, we have a thing called Pran Pratishtha, when we put the idol into the place. Now, when we have the idol and we consecrate that place, she said that you have to breathe into that idol life. Then she said the column that which we have is always breathing. So she said that if you want to be an architect, you must find how to create this breath into a so-called inert matter, which is really not inert. And she said that yogic practice is the key to understanding what you are supposed to do, which means your purpose can be only found within you and not from outside.
Do you practice yoga?
Yes.
What forms of it do you do?
Well, I do meditation. I do little prayers nowadays, the last few years. I do yogic exercises. And I read a lot.
And you feel that there is a tangible relationship that you experience at the end of a period of time in the quality of your work?
The new building that I am doing are totally results of this. Actually, I have now found that one is almost become an instrument. Even this indoor housing just happened by everything came together in terms of images which were there before, right from my village days, childhood days to the recent observations. And Gufa came out, out of that, this Hussein Doshi Gufa that I have done.
Yes.
A lot of these works come out naturally because one is now in tune with the paper and the substance that one is trying to create.
In terms of most of our experience of architecture, there are these little pockets of excellence that architects such as you have created. For most of us, it just seems one chaotic, confused mess, and we despair at this. Where do you think the solutions or the possibilities of initiatives for change might lie?
One of the things I recently found out was that when I was looking at the slides and showing them in Ahmedabad for a new city, I found that we have no urban sense. We have no sense of great city. We don't have straight streets. We don't have the houses connected together like in the old towns. So the first thing is that our image has not changed to the urban scale in terms of speed, in terms of activities, in terms of conglomerated structural systems, which means we always think in a compound and an isolated way. And I think this is one of the major problems, whether you talk of throwing garbage outside the house or putting a building with property lines. Our bylaws are screwed up. For example, why Jaipur city, even today, in spite of the crowd, still looks very good, because the Maharaja thought that city has a different kind of orientation. That means one is talking then identifying with a much larger number than a community or a family. And I don't think that we have that sense. And I think if that is done, our streets would improve because then it will become urban, which means the moment you think of urbanity, you think of collectivism, you think of social services, you think of cleanliness, you think of maintenance, and then you think of architecture as part of that street, not an individual, isolated monument, maybe a small house. I think it will change then.
Sure. It's as if when you travel to some of the ancient cities, both in India and whether it's sort of Rome, Paris, or Jaisalmer, the city has a sense of identity. There's a style, there's a pattern. And what we tend to have in our modern cities is a hodgepodge, a mixture of confused patterns, styles. Do you think our architecture schools are doing a good enough job in orienting our architects?
There I would have two different views. One is that, as I said, urbanity has to be brought in. But also the Indian characteristic, which has paradoxes as part of our life, should not be ignored. In fact, heterogeneity is a big contribution of India to the world, because homogeneity and heterogeneity cannot be isolated. Now, diversity in India is fantastic. Like next to the temple, you have a palace, and then you have huts and you have houses, and you have a big house, and then you find small shanty places. I think this is a part of Indian attitude to a long-range view of life itself. So I would say that this is not taught, which should be taught. But at the same time, what is also not taught is the urbanity in terms of saying, how do we really create this collective consciousness in people about their social responsibilities to one and the neighbor and the rest? How do we really find out that people, when they walk on the street, they have also shaded arcades? How do we find that on the whole, the eye is not constantly bombarded with voids and unkept places? I think these are the issues to me, very important. Because I think what is wrong in the European and the contemporary architecture outside even in India, outside the world, outside India, is that heterogeneity is not there. Order is not the end, Systems are not only working. You need accidents, you need choices, you need diversity, you need a mix of both. Question is proportion. I think we have almost tend towards chaos because of neglect, not by understanding. It's a freedom which I think has been misused.
There is obviously something lacking in the larger national vision that we have failed to provide adequate housing. Well, in fact, we just basically failed to provide housing of any kind. What kind of changes would you like to see in terms of national policy that may change the experience? And
first of all, the land, every human being has a right to own the house. as a citizen. The land ownership, tenancy laws, the urbanization, I think these are the things, which we are not really looking at as cohesively as making a place. They are all like compartments. So what happens is that either you own the house or you don't own a house. Even you can't rent a place because you don't have a place. And we don't talk of housing as a complete policy. When we talk, we swing to saying that, well, let's talk about the housing for the poor. Actually, poor and rich are not the question. We are talking about citizens.
You think this is a question of just resources? There isn't enough money to spend on...
I don't think so. Resources are plenty. I think it's a question of putting things together in a proper perspective. One has never attempted. For example, if one was talking about a new city or a new image brand, I think everything can be done because there are always these cross subsidies possible. And I don't think that the rich or a poor would not share things together by either you pay something else. Everybody has to pay a price. But cross subsidy would help in adjusting that payment in cash or kind. We always want to segregate. I think that's another question which is not good. I think no housing can be segregated. It has always to be mixed. Even no land use can be segregated. We have this British laws which came here, and then we said now the land use has to be restricted, which means offices can be used only during the daytime and night it's empty. Actually, it has never been the case. In fact, a lot of European studies now reveal that these are the ones which are now inducing more crimes. I think places must be used like crops, you have 3 crops and 4 crops. Place must be used multiple times, which we don't do. We have always these compartments and laws. School cannot be done into health center or a gathering place or a social activities. We don't do that. And I think I would say that one has to look at the bylaws, one has to look at these policies, one has to look at the whole structure, economic and social structure as one unit, and perhaps a demonstration would be a nice thing to do if there is a way to demonstrate this, even at 100,000 scale or something.
Well, that's an agenda, I think, large enough for any community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.